Excellent. And this is why I, wanted to talk to you and to create a topic around healing through counsel, because I feel that a lot of times people do experience, of course, things on so many different levels, but because counseling and receiving counseling is shunned and
Yes.
people are ashamed of getting counsel, then they stay ill for a very, very long time. And so just hearing you speak about a spirit support, mechanism that is put in such a simple term is something that should empower those who have been ashamed to say to themselves, you know what, I can get through this. And just even by simply saying to myself, because I've heard Dr. Akhu on Healing Touch talk about saying something positive to myself to help me.
Yes.
If I can do that before actually, getting a counselor to go and see, or if I never go see a counselor, at least I can utilize this technique. And, it's like you said, fear, replacing your fear with faith. And oftentimes I think of faith the way I see darkness and light, is that if you turn off the light, of course, then it's dark.
Right.
But if you just shine a little flicker of light in a dark room, darkness has to flee. It's gone. It's non-existent because of that small flicker of light. And so if you have just a small, minuscule amount of faith, then fear has to flee. And that's just the way I see it, The same way, a grain of mustard seed, the faith the size of a grain of mustard seed. And you can say to that mountain, be thou removed and cast into the sea, and it will be done. And so if you replace that fear with faith, your faith will totally, overpower that fear. Where the fear looked like it was huge, just a small amount of faith will totally dissipate your fear.
Yes.
And so that is the wonderful thing about counsel. And it's my hope and my prayer that people will be able to look at counseling in a new light, not to be ashamed to go to counsel.
I think that part of the reason why people are so ashamed is that especially in communities of color, there's still that stigma that you have to be crazy if you go to counsel.
Right.
And the reality is you're probably crazy if you don't go. I mean, counsel is there to support you.
Right.
To help you heal. I think people also don't understand what I do in my office. They think that I'm going to tell them what to do. Not my job at all. It's your life.
Yes.
My job is to help you get clarity on what you want to do in your life.
Right.
Whatever that is. Because that's your life. I have to tell me what to do in my life.
Right.
But in your life, you're the one in charge. But it's helpful to have somebody to ask you those questions to get you to think about things.
Yes.
So that as one of my patients described, she said, you help me hear my own voice. I had trouble hearing me because everybody else in my family was telling me what they wanted me to do. My mother had one thing, my boyfriend had something else, and what you did was help me clarify my own voice so I can make my own decision. And that's a lot of what goes on in counseling, is really helping people find their own voices as opposed to being subject to what other people want them to do.
Right, right. Wow, and it's so important. I also noticed that you do workshops.
I do workshops.
And so some of the workshops that you do cover different topics: bereavement, anger management, HIV/AIDS, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about those workshops and how we can, possibly use you to help our organizations that need help.
I do custom workshops for any organization. So really, I go in before I do the workshop, find out who's in the audience. Are we going to be working with professionals, with people who don't know a lot about psychology? How many people? I've done workshops for parents groups, for doctors and hospitals. It really, it's one of my favorite things to do as a psychologist, to impart the information that I have and help people learn and grow in a group together. So I do a lot of workshops, of course, on domestic violence, because that's my area of specialty, how domestic violence affects children, what are the signs of domestic violence, why women stay in domestic violence situations, which I think is always an issue that people who are striving to support women don't understand why they might stay. So that's one of the topics I talk on, and all you have to do is go to my website, adwoaakhu.com, and send me a message, and I'll be happy to contact you about creating a workshop for your organization.
Right. And then also the topic that interests me a lot also was the adoption. I saw that the download, the free download under the publications about adoption. Tell me about that. What prompted you to start that?
I've done some work with foster care and adoption, and I specifically worked for quite a while as a consultant with one agency where I did workshops with parents who were foster care parents or adoptive parents, and a lot of parenting workshops, helping them understand the issues that foster care and adoptive children go through in terms of feeling abandoned and issues with their birth parents versus adoptive parents. And through that work, I decided to write an article on helping adoptive children feel like family. And it really talks about some methods you can use to help children to talk about adoption with your children, and then to help them really feel like a part of the family, even though they were not born into the family. So that is available free at adwoaakhu.com. Anybody can download it, and it's one of the topics that I do some workshops on.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Now I have had discussions about domestic violence in the past on Healing Touch. We talked about what happens in domestic violence. We talked even about domestic violence and the church's response to that topic. But we haven't had a lot of people on the show that talked about domestic violence where men were affected by domestic violence, or even male children affected. The focus is usually mainly on women.
Right.
What's your experience with
Well,
that?
the statistics say that about somewhere between 85 and 95% of the people who are victims are women. However, we know that that means that somewhere between 5 and 15% of the other victims are men. I also believe that that is underreported, because I think it's harder for men in this society to talk about being victims. Right. But certainly domestic violence is anybody can be a victim of domestic violence. I think that it's harder for men to reach out for help. This is another reason why I wrote the book, because I thought that maybe men who weren't willing to go to counseling might be able to get some support, better understanding about domestic violence, and some healing through the book. Right. Men are victimized in the same way. I know we don't think about physical abuse with men, but certainly, especially if a man was raised to not raise a hand against a woman, but his wife decides to pick up a pot against him, then that would be abuse. A lot for men, though, it's emotional abuse, belittling, putting them down, trying to control who they see and what they do. And because domestic violence is about the relationship between the two people, then men are equally subject to being victims.
Wow. Well, that is definitely, I feel like you said the number may be 5 to 15%, but even if it's 15 or 20% and it's underreported, it is an important number that we need to look at more. Yes. Especially those who are involved in healing.
Yes, I wrote a blog actually about that, because I know it's not something that gets talked about very much. And one of the issues too is for men, there aren't a lot of shelters for men. There are a lot of domestic violence shelters specifically for women, where women can flee with their children. But where does a man go if he is the victim and he has children he wants to protect? In the United States, I don't believe we have one, not that I'm aware of. The one that I wrote about was in Canada. But it was just very interesting that we're starting to, again, widen the scope of services available to people who are victims. Okay.
Well, maybe that's might be another next project for you.
No.
Well, it's definitely out.
One touch of his love. heart has been broken, your world was torn in two.